The Knight has always been one of Dead by Daylight's more unique killers. But instead of asking what his strongest build is, I wanted to ask a different question. If this guy actually existed during the Middle Ages, what perks would he realistically be running? What's going on, everybody? Today we're throwing the meta completely out of the window and putting together a historically accurate Knight build. Every perk, every add-on, and even the way we're trying to play has one goal. Make this feel like we're commanding an actual medieval knight instead of just another Dead by Daylight killer. Now, I got this idea during the Dead by Daylight's anniversary sale. I picked up a few killers I'd been wanting to learn for a while, mainly the Knight and the Oni, and of course with Jason joining the roster recently, I also had to grab Freddy because it's kinda obvious. But today's video isn't about those other killers. This whole idea came from one of my favorite Dead by Daylight creators, Cry. If you've watched his channel before, you've probably seen his lore and movie accurate builds. I love that concept, but I wanted to take it in a slightly different direction. Instead of asking, what's lore accurate, I wanted to ask, what would history actually look like inside of Dead by Daylight? So before we get too far into this match, let me explain why I picked each perk. First, let's start with the easiest choice, Corrupt Intervention. For anyone newer to Dead by Daylight, Corrupt Intervention blocks the 3 generators furthest away from the killer at the beginning of the match. That forces survivors to come closer to you instead of immediately spreading across the map. Gameplay-wise, it's fantastic for slowing down early game, especially on larger maps where survivors can normally disappear before you've even found someone. Historically though, this perk made even more sense. Contrary to what movies sometimes show, medieval knights rarely just charge straight into battle hoping everything worked out. A huge part of warfare was controlling terrain. Bridges, castle gates, mountain passes, even open fields. If you could dictate where your enemy had to fight, you immediately gave yourself an advantage. That's exactly what Corrupt Intervention does. Instead of letting survivors repair whichever generator they feel like, we're forcing them into our battlefield. Basically, you have to turn the tide on them. Next up, I chose Spirit Fury. Honestly, I don't think enough people use this perk anymore. After breaking enough pallets, the next pallet that stuns you instantly breaks. It's simple, but incredibly satisfying. Gameplay-wise, Spirit Fury keeps your momentum going. Historically, this one was inspired by how heavily armored knights fought. Most medieval plate armor weighed somewhere around 50 to 60 pounds, but it was surprisingly well distributed. Contrary to popular belief, knights weren't clumsy walking refrigerators. They could sprint, jump, climb, even mount horses without any help, despite what Hollywood likes to tell us. The whole point of that armor was to absorb punishment while allowing you to keep advancing. That's why Spirit Fury fits so well. A wooden pallet might try and stop your average person, but a knight, I don't think so. Now for the third perk, it took me forever to settle on which one I wanted to go with. Originally, I wanted Iron Maiden. The name, perfect. The gameplay, not so much. Because unless these survivors started using lockers, which rarely happens, it just wasn't going to give enough value and wasn't going to do much. Now Hubris was another option, which honestly would have worked, but it felt pretty expected. So instead, I ended up choosing Rampage. Gameplay-wise, Rampage rewards you for staying aggressive and constantly applying pressure around loops. Historically, knights didn't win battles by backing off every time they met resistance. Once a defensive line started breaking, that was the moment to push. Momentum was everything. You lose momentum, and suddenly your army is the one retreating. You gain momentum, and entire battles could snowball. That's exactly how I wanted this build to feel. Now, let's talk about the last perk. I chose Oppression. Whenever you kick a generator, up to 3 other generators begin regressing as well, assuming survivors aren't actively repairing them. Gameplay-wise, this helps spread pressure across the map. Even if I'm only physically standing at one generator, survivors have to start worrying about multiple objectives. Historically, I thought this fit the knight better than almost anything else. Real medieval warfare wasn't always about charging into battle and fighting until one side disappeared. A lot of wars were won by making life miserable for the enemy, destroy their crops, burn supply wagons, lay siege to castles, force them into making their own mistakes. A commander who could pressure multiple locations at once was far more dangerous than one who could only focus on a single objective. That's exactly what oppression represents. It isn't the flashiest perk in game, but thematically, I honestly think it's perfect. Now, when you put all four perks together, they actually tell a story. Corrupt Intervention controls the battlefield, Spirit Fury represents resilience, Rampage rewards momentum, and Oppression spreads pressure. Those four ideas, control, resilience, momentum, and pressure, are exactly what made medieval armies successful. Now, whether they make me successful, that's a completely different story. I'll be honest. Coming into this video, I had almost no experience with the knight. I knew what he did, I'd played against him maybe one or two times, but actually controlling him, that was a different experience. My first couple of games basically looked like this. I would choose a guard here, I'd miss an attack, another guard, miss again. Maybe if I'd summon a third guard, surely one of them figures it out. That strategy was terrible. Once I slowed down and actually learned what each guard specialized in, everything suddenly clicked. The Carnifex is your powerhouse. Need a pallet gun? Send him. Generator? Send him. Pretty sure if behavior let him, he'd knock down the exit gates too. I wouldn't be complaining. Then you've got the Assassin. This guy is actually what his name suggests. He's fast and aggressive, perfect for chasing injured survivors and forcing them to keep moving. And finally, the Jailer. He's probably the least exciting at first glance, but once I realized how long he patrols, I actually started appreciating just how much information he can give you. Instead of randomly just throwing guards around, I started asking, which guard actually makes sense right now? That one change alone made me feel 10 times more effective. With moments like these, it really started to make me appreciate all the information and utility the guards could truly give you if you took the time to learn each of their roles properly. The more I played him, the more I realized something. Behavior actually did a surprisingly good job making this killer feel like an actual commander instead of just a guy with a sword. And yes, missing that first swing was probably as embarrassing as for you to watch as it was for me playing the actual game. Thankfully, I was just happy getting her on the hook so I could get some momentum back. But focusing back on the knight's character himself, I do want to start to go into his lore because it gets pretty interesting. A big thing that really surprised me while researching this video is just how grounded the knight's lore actually is. Now, I don't want to butcher his real name, so I'm just going to call him the Knight. Unlike what you might expect, he wasn't born into royalty. He wasn't some legendary king or noble prince destined to rule a kingdom. Instead, he earned his reputation through war. Over time, the Knight became the leader of his mercenary company, his power in game, which was a group feared for their discipline, brutality, and willingness to take on almost any contract. That's actually something rooted in real medieval history. Mercenary companies were incredibly common throughout Europe. Kings, nobles, and even entire cities would hire experienced soldiers whenever they needed extra manpower. Sometimes these companies fought for a cause. Other times, they fought for whoever paid the most. That's one of the reasons I think Behavior absolutely nailed the Knight's power. His guards aren't just random summons, they're his company. You have the Carnifex, the Assassin, and the Jailer. They're all different soldiers with different responsibilities. You're not just playing one killer, you're commanding an entire unit. That's honestly why I think the Knight has one of the coolest designs in Dead by Daylight. Instead of giving him just some random magical superpower, his strength comes from leadership. You're constantly thinking ahead. Where do I send a guard? Which survivor is most important? Should I pressure this generator or cut someone off at a loop? Every decision you make feels less like playing an action game and more like you're commanding troops. And I'll admit, I completely underestimated this killer. Before buying him, I honestly thought his gameplay looked a little repetitive. I figured I'd spend every match just dropping guards and hoping for the best. But after actually putting some time into him, there's way more depth than I expected. Now, I don't think the knight is perfect. There are definitely moments where he feels a little clunky. Sometimes I'll send a guard exactly where I want, and they decide they have their own other plans. It's not game breaking, but it's enough to make you scratch your head every once in a while. I also wish the guards felt a little bit more independent. Watching them immediately run back toward you after finishing their patrol can sometimes break the immersion. I understand why it works that way from a gameplay perspective, but it would have been really cool if they felt even more like actual soldiers operating on their own. Even with those flaws, I walked away from this video appreciating the knight way more than I expected. And honestly, that's exactly what a historically accurate build should do. It shouldn't just make the game harder, and it shouldn't strive for using meta perks. It should make you appreciate the character and their design as a whole. Honestly, even in slow gameplay moments like this, just walking around as a giant knight in a suit of armor in a game where you're playing with killers like Ghostface, Jason now, and even Freddy, definitely made it more fun. It gave it a different perspective. And like I was saying with the guards, if you have them up and they're ready, you could have ended this chase sooner. Maybe you could have interrupted that healing that we're trying to get off. But, I mean, just being able to do this. If you look, I was able to get information on her and actually not down her, but put her in a similar state. That's great for someone who struggles in chases like I do. I mean, even here, I didn't notice her in that corner until I was actually watching back this footage to edit it. That was complete luck. I'm glad that I was able to get her, but honestly, I don't know how I missed her. After getting to spend a few hours learning the knight, researching medieval history, and putting this build to the test, I think we've finally gotten our answer. Would this be the build I'd recommend if you're trying to hit the highest ranks in Dead by Daylight? Absolutely not. There are definitely stronger meta builds that you can get more consistent results with, but that was never really our goal. The goal was to build something that actually captured what made a medieval knight so effective. I was able to control the battlefield, I was leading from the front with my guards, I broke through defenses, and honestly, constantly applying pressure on the enemy felt great. When you look at it from this perspective, I honestly think this build does a really solid job. After finally getting to spend a few hours learning the knight, researching medieval warfare, and putting this build to the test, I think I've got my answer. Is this the strongest build in Dead by Daylight? Definitely not. If your goal in every match is to climb as efficiently as possible, there are much more stronger perk combinations out there. But that's not what this video was about. I wanted to build something that actually captured what made a medieval knight successful. Looking back on it now, I think these 4 perks do a surprisingly good job of representing that. I also walked away with a much bigger appreciation for the knight himself. Before making this video, I thought it was just a pretty straightforward killer whose guards did most of the work. After putting time into him, I realized there's a lot more strategy involved than I gave him credit for. Knowing when to use each guard is very important. Controlling space and planning ahead all make him feel completely different once you start understanding his kit. If I had to rate this build, I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. It's fun, it's thematic, and even if it isn't meta, it really does make you feel like you're commanding a medieval warband. If you enjoyed today's video, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like. If you're new here, consider subscribing for more Dead by Daylight builds and Marvel Rivals content. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.